Queen Camilla accused a royal guard of breaking protocol and had him thrown out of Buckingham Palace in front of the entire state banquet. But this guard wasn't guilty of what she claimed. And when he finally spoke, he brought proof the palace never wanted the world to see. Proof that pointed straight to Camilla's role in Diana's death. What happened next didn't just clear his name, it changed the monarchy forever. Now, before we reveal exactly what that proof was, make sure you're subscribed to our channel Guard Watch and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, because what you're about to discover will shake you to your core. The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace shimmered under crystal chandeliers that January evening. 200 of the world's most powerful people gathered for a state banquet, honouring a century of diplomatic ties with France. Every gesture was calculated, every conversation capable of reshaping nations over brandy and protocol. Standing at the eastern end of the ballroom, Sergeant Major Thomas Redford embodied ceremonial perfection. At 54, his scarlet tunic was immaculate, medals aligned with mathematical precision. But his eyes marked him as different, deeper, more watchful, like someone who'd spent decades learning to see what others chose to ignore. Tonight felt different, not because of the occasion, but because of his unusual placement. Guards rarely stood inside the grand ballroom during seated dinners. His assignment had been quietly arranged without explanation. The herald's voice rang out. Her Majesty, the Queen Consort. Camilla entered on King Charles's arm, diamonds catching light with each step. Her expression was practiced serenity until her gaze found Redford's position. Something shifted. A barely perceptible tightening around her eyes, recognition followed by what might have been fear. She leaned toward Lord Telford without breaking stride. Remove him, at once. Telford's step faltered. Your Majesty, during the dinner? Quietly, she replied with the authority that didn't allow questions, and without scene. Two plainclothes officers approached from the side entrance. Even their deliberate casualness couldn't prevent conversations from pausing, cutlery stilling against china. Sergeant Major, the lead officer murmured, we'll need you to step out with us. This isn't my scheduled relief, Redford replied neutrally. Orders from senior protocol. Please come with us now. Redford didn't resist. His training wouldn't allow it. But as he followed them toward the corridor, whispers rose behind him. Even in a state dinner, people knew when something significant had happened. By the time he returned to his quarters in Wellington Barracks that night, the machinery was already in motion. The official statement appeared on the Buckingham Palace press feed at precisely 10:47 p.m. During this evening's diplomatic banquet, a ceremonial guard was relieved of duty following a minor protocol irregularity. The matter is under internal review. No security concerns were present at any time. It was the kind of language designed to sound reassuring, while hinting at something more serious underneath. Within an hour, royal correspondents had begun adding their own interpretations. An anonymous palace source told one tabloid that the guard in question, a senior member of the household division, had been removed after displaying unusual behaviour and failing to maintain appropriate ceremonial bearing. The morning headlines sharpened the narrative. Security scare at palace dinner across the Daily Chronicle, Camilla's quick thinking in the Herald. Though none named Redford directly, the description was enough. By midday, veteran message boards buzzed with disbelief from former comrades. What they didn't know was that Redford's 1997 assignment to Diana's covert security detail had placed him near events still whispered about decades later. He'd assumed that chapter was buried, but Camilla's recognition told him otherwise. 4 days later, a plain envelope slid under his door. Inside was a parliamentary summons. Committee on Historic Security Irregularities. Tuesday, 1400 hours, Palace of Westminster. Matters concerning historic royal security deployments, 1997 to 1998. Redford walked to his desk and unlocked the bottom drawer. The leather folio inside had moved with him through every posting for 27 years, never opened publicly. It contained 2 items that shouldn't have survived. By noon, his decision was made. Tuesday afternoon, Westminster's rain-slicked pavements led Redford to a windowless chamber where 3 MPs waited behind a curved table. He wore a dark suit, the leather folio under his arm. "Sergeant Major, you may speak freely," the committee chair said. "You've brought something for us?" "Two items I was ordered to destroy in July 1990. I kept them instead." He withdrew a cream envelope, worn smooth by decades of handling. Across the front, in Diana's distinctive handwriting, "For Charles only." This letter was given to me by Princess Diana on July 15th, 1990, after an unannounced meeting with Camilla Parker Bowles at Kensington Palace. One of the MPs consulted his notes. "That meeting doesn't appear in any official record." "No, sir, it doesn't. And it was never meant to. My orders that night were straightforward. Maintain position outside the princess's study until instructed otherwise." After Mrs. Parker Bowles left, the princess emerged visibly distressed and handed me this envelope. She asked me to ensure it reached the then Prince of Wales personally. He paused, his eyes fixed on the letter that had haunted him for nearly 3 decades. The next morning, a senior palace aide intercepted me before I could complete the delivery. He informed me that the letter was a product of emotional distress and paranoia, and ordered me to destroy it immediately. Instead, I sealed it in this folio and never spoke of it again. The chair made a note. "Will you read the letter for our record?" Redford carefully extracted the folded page, handling it as though it might disintegrate at his touch. Diana's distinctive handwriting covered most of the cream paper in flowing lines that seemed to carry the weight of desperation. "If you are reading this, I pray it reaches Charles, but if not, let this serve as a record of what happened tonight in my home." His voice remained steady, but something in his bearing suggested the gravity of words that had waited decades to be spoken aloud. "She came to see me without announcement. No appointment, no security detail, no official record. Just her and a driver who waited outside, while she explained how my future was going to unfold. She wasn't cruel about it, which somehow made it worse. She spoke about Charles's happiness, about the monarchy's need for stability, about how messy divorces damage the crown's reputation." The stenographer's keys clicked rapidly, capturing every word of testimony that would soon reshape British history. "She said the public would eventually accept her as queen, but only if I stepped aside gracefully. She suggested there were ways to make my departure appear voluntary, ways that would benefit everyone involved. But if I chose to fight, if I made things difficult by using the children or public sympathy as weapons..." Redford paused, looking up from the letter to gauge the committee's reaction. What he saw in their faces was a mixture of fascination and growing alarm. "She said that accidents happen to people who don't understand when it's time to disappear. She said it with a smile, as though discussing the weather, but her eyes were cold when she spoke those words." One MP had stopped taking notes entirely, too focused on listening to document what he was hearing. Another leaned forward, his expression grave. Redford continued reading, his voice dropping slightly as he reached Diana's final paragraphs. "I know how this must sound, paranoid, desperate, unhinged, but I've learned to trust my instincts about people who threaten you while smiling. Tonight, looking into her eyes, I saw someone who's been planning this conversation for months, perhaps years." The room had grown so quiet that the faint hum of ventilation seemed loud by comparison. "If something happens to me, if I have an accident, or suddenly develop a desire to retreat from public life, remember this meeting. Remember that some people get what they want by making their competition disappear. And remember that not all disappearances are voluntary." Redford carefully refolded the letter and returned it to its envelope, his movements precise and respectful. She signed it with her full name and title, then sealed it immediately. The wax was still warm when she handed it to me. "But it never reached Prince Charles," the chair observed. "It was intercepted by staff who deemed it too dangerous to deliver. I was told that the princess was having another breakdown and that letters like this only make situations worse." He placed the envelope back on the table, then reached into the folio again. 6 weeks later, Diana was dead in a Paris tunnel, and I realised I wasn't the only one who'd been keeping secrets about that night. The second item he withdrew was a small black cassette tape, the kind that had been obsolete for nearly 2 decades. A strip of masking tape along its edge bore 3 words in block capitals, AUG 29, late. This was given to me by a contact in MI6 2 days after the crash. He approached me during what appeared to be a chance encounter at a coffee shop near Vauxhall Bridge. Slipped this into my hand and said, "You didn't get this from me." I never saw him again. The committee chair signalled to a clerk, who produced a portable cassette player and inserted the tape. For a moment there was only static and background noise. Then a woman's voice emerged from the small speaker. Calm, measured, unmistakably upper-class British. "Are you certain the escort can be delayed?" A pause. Another voice, male and indistinct, responded with words too muffled to understand clearly. The woman again. "Good. Delays will be better for all concerned. The longer route ensures flexibility." The tape clicked to silence. The entire recording lasted less than 30 seconds, but the temperature in the room seemed to have dropped several degrees. "That voice," one MP said quietly. "Have you identified it?" "I recognised it immediately," Redford replied. "The same voice I'd heard outside the Princess's study in July. Camilla Parker Bowles, discussing what sounds very much like alterations to Diana's security arrangements on the night she died." The younger MP leaned forward. "This was recorded when?" "August 29th, according to my contact. 2 days before the Paris crash. And as we know, Diana's escort route was indeed changed multiple times that evening, changes that placed her car in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel at precisely the wrong moment." The chair exchanged glances with her colleagues before speaking again. "Sergeant Major, why didn't you present this evidence during the official inquest in 2004? Redford's answer came without hesitation. "Because I still believe that protecting the crown meant protecting it from all threats, including the threat of scandal. I thought my duty required silence, even when silence meant allowing lies to become official truth." He gestured toward the envelope and tape on the table between them. "But when the Queen Consort recognised me at that state dinner and had me removed, I realised that some threats to the crown come from within, and that protecting the institution sometimes means exposing the people who would corrupt it." The chair made a final note, then set down her pen. "This committee will require authenticated copies of both items. For now, this session is adjourned pending further investigation." Redford stood, leaving the folio and its contents on the witness table. As he walked toward the exit, he paused at the door. "I've served the Crown faithfully for 33 years, he said quietly. "But my greatest service may have been knowing when to stop protecting it from the truth." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving the committee members alone with evidence that would soon transform British history forever. For 12 hours after leaving Westminster, Thomas Redford's life remained unchanged. He walked the familiar streets back to his modest flat, made tea with the precision of military routine, and sat by the window as London's winter evening pressed against the glass. The world below continued its eternal rhythm, unaware that the foundations of the monarchy were about to shift. But the quiet didn't last. By morning, his phone vibrated with messages from numbers he didn't recognise. At first he ignored them. Then a text arrived from a former comrade in the Grenadier Guards. "Tom, it's everywhere. Turn on the news." He did. And there it was. Grainy photographs of him entering Parliament, headlines scrolling across the bottom of news channels, his name spoken by anchors who pronounced it with the careful precision of people handling something explosive. A BBC presenter was reading from what appeared to be leaked committee transcripts. Former Royal Guard Sergeant Major Thomas Redford has alleged in closed parliamentary testimony that Queen Camilla delivered direct threats to Princess Diana weeks before her death, and that he possesses both written and audio evidence supporting these claims. Other channels abandoned such restraint. Sky News ran the headline, "Royal Guard exposes Diana cover-up," while their American counterparts were even more direct. "Smoking gun. Did Camilla plan Diana's death?" By afternoon, the story had gone global. French television replayed the brief audio clip with English subtitles. American talk shows devoted entire segments to analysing Diana's handwriting. Australian breakfast programmes interviewed royal experts who struggled to explain how such evidence could have remained hidden for nearly 3 decades. Outside Buckingham Palace, small groups began to gather. By evening, the crowd had swelled into the hundreds, many carrying photographs of Diana from her charitable work, others holding signs reading, "Justice for Diana, and we believe you, Thomas." The palace's response came at precisely 7 o'clock p.m., released through official channels in language that had been carefully crafted by lawyers and communications specialists. The Queen Consort categorically denies the allegations contained in purported leaked testimony. Her Majesty has always supported full and transparent investigations into the tragic death of Diana, Princess of Wales, and continues to do so. The statement landed like a stone in a hurricane. The vigils continued, growing larger as word spread through social media. Hashtags trended across dozens of countries. Calls for an independent investigation surged, supported by MPs from across the political spectrum who could no longer ignore the mounting evidence. In his small flat, Redford kept the curtains drawn and his phone switched off. He'd said what needed saying to the people with power to act. Whether they chose to do so was beyond his control now. What he didn't know was that, in the private apartments of Kensington Palace, the future king had already decided that action was not only necessary, it was inevitable. Prince William stood at the tall windows of his study, watching January rain streak down glass that had witnessed decades of royal family secrets. Behind him, on the desk that had once belonged to his mother, lay a leather-bound file marked with the name that hadn't left the headlines in days: Sergeant Major Thomas Redford. Across from the desk, Sir Daniel Marchant, William's legal advisor since his university days, closed a folder containing preliminary analysis of the leaked testimony. "It's not disappearing," Marchant said quietly. "The palace can issue denials, but that audio recording is circulating everywhere. And the letter, experts are already confirming the handwriting matches your mother's authenticated samples." William didn't turn from the window. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decisions that would reshape his family's future. "Then we find out everything. All of it." That night, operating under protocols normally reserved for national security matters, William authorised what would later be known as Operation Mallerie, an internal investigation unlike any the royal household had conducted in living memory. Its mandate was broad enough to examine every relevant document, financial record, and communication from 1919, and specific enough to focus on the individuals who'd had both motive and opportunity to arrange Diana's death. The team operated from a secure office in the basement of St James's Palace, working through nights and weekends to process decades of archived material. They pulled bank statements from accounts that hadn't been touched in years, decrypted digital records from the early days of email, and cross-referenced travel itineraries with telephone logs that had been stored in climate-controlled filing systems since the late 1990s. For 10 days, they found fragments, suspicious patterns in scheduling, unusually large discretionary payments, communications that had been carefully scrubbed from official records. Individually, none of it would have been sufficient to challenge the official narrative. Together, it suggested a level of coordination that extended far beyond what any single person could have accomplished alone. On the 11th day, they found something that changed everything. A wire transfer order dated August the 28th, 1997, 24 hours before Diana's death, authorising payment of £1.9 million from a discretionary Clarence House account to something called Logistics Solutions European, a consulting firm based in Brussels with connections to private security contractors operating throughout France. The payment authorisation bore the signature of a senior aide who still served in Camilla's household. The consulting firm's records, obtained through diplomatic channels, showed payments to 3 French nationals with backgrounds in route planning, vehicle maintenance, and what the euphemistically termed traffic management. 2 days later, another document surfaced. An internal memo marked sensitive legacy planning, discussing escort modifications and noting that extended delays preferable for all parties. The timestamp matched exactly with Redford's cassette recording. William read both documents in the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Schedule a meeting with the Prime Minister," he told Marchant, "and tell him I'm requesting a public tribunal, not an inquiry, not a review, a tribunal with full powers and television coverage." Marchant nodded, understanding that they had crossed a line from which there would be no return. Westminster Hall had hosted coronations, lying in state ceremonies, and trials that altered the course of nations. But on that cold February morning, it contained a different kind of historical moment, quieter perhaps, but no less significant for its restraint. Press benches lined the ancient stone walls, reporters leaning forward with the intensity of people who understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. Members of the public, selected by lottery from tens of thousands of applications, filled every available seat. Television cameras stood fixed in position, their red lights creating a constellation of attention focused on the raised platform where history would be made or unmade. The Royal Security Tribunal convened at the request of both the Prime Minister and the Prince of Wales, carrying powers that hadn't been invoked since the constitutional crises of the 1930s. At the judge's bench, Lord Ashcombe and 4 senior colleagues presided over proceedings that would determine not just individual guilt or innocence, but the future credibility of the institution they were sworn to protect. Before them sat the key figures: Thomas Redford, in a dark suit, his military bearing unchanged by the weight of global attention; Sir Alaric Grant, representing Queen Camilla, with the kind of legal expertise reserved for cases that could topple governments; and a collection of archivists, security experts, and forensic specialists whose testimony would either validate or destroy nearly 3 decades of accepted truth. Lord Ashcombe's gavel fell once, creating silence in a room that held its breath. This tribunal is now in session. We begin with evidence submitted under Operation Mallerie. The exhibits came forward with ceremonial precision. First, Diana's handwritten letter, authenticated by 2 independent forensic document analysts and displayed on screens visible throughout the hall. Gasps rippled through the gallery as her elegant script appeared in magnified detail. The words, "Accidents happen to people who don't understand when it's time to disappear," rendered with devastating clarity. Next came the audio recording, played twice, first in its original quality, then digitally enhanced. The calm, measured voice discussing delays and flexibility filled the ancient hall, followed by expert testimony confirming its match with known recordings of Camilla from the same period. The financial records followed: the £1.9 million transfer to the Brussels consulting firm, complete documentation of payments to French contractors, and the memo discussing escort modifications that coincided exactly with the timeline of Diana's final journey. Throughout the presentation of evidence, Camilla sat motionless beside her counsel, eyes fixed on the table before her. Sir Alaric cross-examined each witness with professional skill, characterizing the evidence as circumstantial, misinterpreted, and corrupted by decades of conspiracy theories. But each rebuttal seemed to carry less weight than the documents and recordings the public could see and hear for themselves. The pivotal moment came when Prince William took the stand. He approached the witness box with the measured dignity of someone who understood that his words would echo through history, then turned to face a room full of people who had watched him grow from a grieving child into the man who might one day be their king. "My mother wrote this letter," he said, holding up the cream-coloured paper with reverent care, "because she believed her life was in danger. Not from strangers or terrorists or the hazards of celebrity, but from someone close to our family who saw her as an obstacle to personal ambition." His voice remained steady as he read Diana's words aloud, each sentence carrying a weight that no legal argument could diminish. When he finished, the hall was completely silent except for the faint whisper of rain against the medieval windows. "I cannot bring my mother back," William continued, returning the letter to its place among the evidence. "But I can ensure that the truth about her death is finally told, and that those responsible are held accountable for what they did." As he stepped down from the witness box, even hardened journalists wiped away tears. The cameras captured members of Parliament looking down at their notes, unable to meet the eyes of a son who had just testified about his mother's murder. Lord Ashcombe called for recess, but the verdict was already forming, not just in the tribunal chamber, but in the court of public opinion that had watched every moment unfold on television screens around the world. The next morning, Westminster Hall filled beyond capacity. People lined the corridors outside, watching on phones and tablets as Lord Ashcombe prepared to deliver findings that would determine the fate of the monarchy itself. The senior judge adjusted his spectacles and surveyed the room with the gravity of someone who understood that his words would be studied by historians for generations to come. This tribunal has considered sworn testimony, authenticated documentary evidence, verified audio recordings, and financial records linking the discretionary accounts of Clarence House to private contractors active in Paris during the final days of Diana, Princess of Wales. The gallery held its breath. While we make no finding as to the precise mechanism of her death, we conclude that Camilla Parker Bowles, now Queen Consort, engaged in conduct designed to threaten and intimidate the Princess of Wales. We further conclude that she utilised Crown resources to finance operations that directly contributed to the circumstances surrounding the Princess's death. A collective gasp swept through the hall, followed by the kind of profound silence that occurs when people realise they've witnessed history change course. It is therefore the judgment of this tribunal that the Queen Consort be immediately relieved of all ceremonial duties and official responsibilities. She is to withdraw from public life permanently, with residence restricted to designated properties under appropriate supervision. These recommendations will be conveyed to His Majesty the King with the tribunal's unanimous support. Outside Westminster Hall, Parliament Square erupted. Thousands of people who had gathered to watch on outdoor screens burst into applause that could be heard blocks away. Chants of justice for Diana mixed with cheers for Thomas Redford, whose courage had finally brought truth to light. Inside the hall, Redford sat motionless at the witness table. This wasn't triumph for him, it was simply the end of a 27-year burden. The truth had been told where it mattered, by people with the authority to act on it. Camilla stood only after the session was formally adjourned, walking out beside her counsel without looking at the cameras or the crowds. Her face showed neither anger nor sorrow, just the hollow expression of someone whose carefully constructed world had collapsed in the space of a morning. That evening, Buckingham Palace released its final statement on the matter. The King has accepted the recommendations of the Royal Security Tribunal. The Queen Consort will step back from public life with immediate effect, in accordance with the Tribunal's findings. In the days that followed, candlelit vigils appeared across Britain, outside Kensington Palace, in village squares, even at the gates of Althorpe, where Diana lay buried. Veterans' associations sent formal letters of support to Redford, many signed by men who had served alongside him on parade grounds that now seemed like remnants of a simpler time. For the first time in nearly 30 years, the events of August 31st, 1997 were no longer shrouded in speculation and conspiracy theories. They were part of the official record, acknowledged by the highest levels of British justice and witnessed by the world. The media attention faded, as it always does, moving on to fresher scandals and newer crises. But the truth, once established, proved more durable than the headlines that had carried it into the light. Thomas Redford returned to the Hampshire cottage he'd purchased with his pension, far from London and the ceremonies that had defined his adult life. He unpacked his uniforms one final time, placing them in cedar storage with the care of someone who had served honourably and knew it. The leather folio went into a steel lockbox on a high shelf, no longer hidden for protection, but preserved for history. Its contents belonged to the world now, evidence in a case that had finally reached its verdict. On quiet mornings he walked the country lanes with a dog he'd rescued from a regimental mate, breathing air that smelled of rain and growing things instead of marble corridors and ceremonial incense. When reporters occasionally found their way to his door, he offered only the same response. The truth speaks for itself now, the rest is for others to decide. In London, the machinery of monarchy ground forward with the relentless efficiency that had carried it through revolutions, wars and scandals, stretching back centuries. But something fundamental had changed. The institution that had seemed unshakable just months earlier now operated under the watchful eye of a public that had learned not to accept official explanations without question. And in the silence of his cottage evenings, Thomas Redford felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. The peace that comes from carrying no more secrets, no more burdens of truth too dangerous to speak. He had served his country faithfully for 33 years. But his greatest service had been knowing when loyalty to the crown meant protecting it from those who would corrupt it from within. Diana's truth had taken 27 years to surface, but once spoken in Westminster Hall before the eyes of the world, it could never be buried again. Some secrets, once exposed, change everything they touch. And sometimes the most important witnesses are those who wait decades to find their voice, then speak with the quiet authority that brings down kingdoms. What do you think? Should Thomas Redford have come forward years earlier, even if it meant breaking his oath of service? And do you believe Diana's death was ever properly investigated? Or are there still secrets waiting to be uncovered? If this story opened your eyes to what might really have happened that night in Paris, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more investigations into the truths powerful people don't want you to discover. Share this with anyone who still believes some secrets are too dangerous to tell, because as we've seen, the most dangerous secrets are often the ones that are kept. There's another story waiting for you right on your screen. Click it now, and we'll see you tomorrow with another reminder that truth, no matter how long it takes to surface, always finds a way into the light. Thanks for watching. And remember, not all accidents are accidental, and not all guardsmen stay silent forever.